Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, scholars. I'm Mr. Gaming Counselor. Welcome to the counselor's office. You know what's funny? Is that sometimes I wonder if Bungie even knows their own game, especially when they have people like DMG making stupid ass tweets, and then you have new players who know better about the game than the developers themselves. And it's not the first time. Remember Waitgate with the whole drama with the perks? Bungie's like, oh, it's not a problem. And then the community collectively got their PhDs in like mathematics and showed how much Bungie doesn't know their game. It is crazy how often the community shows Bungie that we know more about their game than they do. And it's always the meme, like, we'll become a developer. Well, I think at this point, you might hire people from the community to be developers because they would do a better job than the people working at Bungie currently. Well, this is a perfect segue. We're going to, the whole drama between NotSwap and how Bungie's like, well, we've got to do this because loadouts are a problem. It is funny. Anytime Bungie says something, especially like DMG made a whole thing about Reckoning and how it's becoming an issue that the encounters are based on loadout swapping. And I'm sitting there thinking, was overpowered and it's been nerfed like 5-6 times already. And yet Bungie continues to make content that always requires people to use well and is still used for every day one contest. There's no other reason not to run well. It's funny that Bungie just doesn't understand. And so we have Milo. Milo's from zombies. And let's be honest, Call of Duty has its issues, it has its woes, especially zombies. But for Easter egg hunting, you have to use logic and critical thinking. And it's the fun of the exploration of it. We have hidden secret exotic missions, or at least we did. This episode, we actually got some of that, which is really nice. It was really nice to see Borrow Dyad with an actual hidden mission instead of like, hey guys, here it is. Just do the thing for 3 weeks. Wasn't that fun? So this one, it was a better process, in my opinion, being able to look for it and do all the fun stuff. It almost like Easter egg hunting. Milo is no slouch when it comes to critical thinking and processing. You see this man talk about a video game, he's going to spit you some facts. He's a new Destiny 2 player, and yet he has more understanding, and I've seen his tweets, more understanding about the issues of the game than the developers and even the people who continue to play the game. It is funny because so many people are like narrow-minded, like, oh, these aren't issues. And he's like, yeah, this is an issue. But we're going to talk about NotSwap, which most people, I would say it's like a 60, 70, probably 60% of the community doesn't like it, while the other 40% either is like half of that is either doesn't give a crap because they don't engage with the content that's going to be involved in anyways, or they're just saying, hey, you're stupid because you think NotSwap is bad. And I think it is bad, mostly because most modifiers in Destiny are trash and ass and lazy, whereas I feel like real innovation like Bane's is a step in the right direction for true challenge. But we're going to see what Mr. Waffles, the man, the myth, the legend himself, as a new Destiny 2 player, what he has. I've kind of seen some of the stuff. It's an hour long. I don't know if I will watch all of it. I will try to cut through and see what he says.
The Destiny community is incredibly divided right now in a way that I haven't seen since about 10 seconds ago. So today I'm going to use this one.
He already knows.
Whiteboard pen and this whiteboard to do the following 3 things. Number 1, we're going to explain the problem. Number 2, we're going to explain Bungie's proposed solution to the problem. And number 3, we're going to analyze that to determine whether or not it's the fix that Bungie thinks it is. Now, you
know what's funny? A large, a chunk of the community can't even do the basic and process of what's the problem, how are they trying to fix it, and is it really fixing it? People are like, Bungie says it's bad, so it's bad.
Might be wondering, what makes me so qualified to do all this in the first place, right? I must be a Destiny god. I must be a Destiny survival to the human eye. It gives me a level of perception.
I'm just skipping ahead because I like the intro but it's an hour long, and I don't want a 2-hour long video because you know I'm going to talk. So
23 pop quiz for you. What was relevant or important about February 24 Extreme? Right. This.
Okay, I'm skipping ahead. I'm seeing when it came out, the key phrases: swapping exotic armor, kinetic weapons, and energy drains all ability energy. That is not swapping in a nutshell. It was mostly for PvP. Again, I'm trying to get to the meat of it, how it actually works. This I'm interested in. I'm just trying to save some time. This
explanation here is really not a good explanation of how it works. So we're going to work through a couple of.
I feel like that is pretty much most of how Destiny goes. Bungie puts some kind of summary or explanation, and it's usually not correct in some way.
Worked examples now, and we're gonna.
You think Bungie is gonna actually put stuff in the game and then explain it verbatim? No.
Do this with a second whiteboard, and we're gonna do it as a little bit of a pop quiz. Okay, so you can play along at home. So question 1 for when NotSwap is active. Okay, if you're using an exotic helmet and you swap to another exotic helmet,
it drains the energy.
Does that violate NotSwap? And by violate, I mean, does that trigger NotSwap and cause you to lose all of your ability energy? Right?
Yes, it does.
Exotic helm to exotic helm. The answer is that is violative, and that means
because that was the whole reason they did it for PvPs. People were hot swapping specific exotics on the fly, and it wasn't even loadout swapping. They were literally just swapping manually. Like, that is probably gonna come up. I thought I saw something here. Yeah, people were just swapping in trials on the fly.
Means that you do lose your ability energy if you swap exotic helm to exotic helm. Let's go number 2. What if you use your well first? Okay, so you're on Warlock, you place a well, and then you swap from exotic helm to exotic helm. Does your well go away?
No.
Because you lost all your ability energy?
Nope.
Or does it stay there? Or like, what's the deal? In that scenario, the well will stay, so you'll keep the well.
And the reason why the well stays is it's considered an entity, which is why in PvP, you can shoot well and do damage and kill it. It's considered an entity, like not like a living entity or like a player, but it's like a construct, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. I've never shot it with like deconstruct, but it is insane along the lines that it's an entity that takes damage. So it stays on the field.
But it's still violative. So you'll be standing in your well, but you'll lose all your other abilities. You lose your grenade and your class ability and stuff like that. But you're in a well at that point, so like, who cares, right? So you can kind of get around NotSwap there a little bit by just placing the well first. Next scenario, you've got a fusion rifle that uses green ammo, and you swap it to a sniper rifle which uses green ammo. Is that violative of NotSwap? And remember, we said before, swapping exotic armor, kinetic weapons, and energy weapons drains all ability energy, right? So you might think that that would mean swapping a fusion using green to a sniper using green, like using energy ammo, would be violative. But it's actually not violative. It's fine.
Here's why it's not violative. In PvP, a swap, if I remember correctly, like, I don't know how it is now, but it used to be where if you'd swap weapons, like a fusion to like a shotgun or something, you essentially would just lose most of your ammo, if not all of it. And so swap, it's already built into the game. Like, if you swap to certain archetypes, you lose ammo. Or it used to also be you also gained ammo. They did, I believe, patch that. For me, PvE, because people do like rocket LMG swaps. There's been a lot of cheeses to abuse it that have nothing to do with loadout swapping. It just has to do with how Bungie has tweaked ammo in general, which was found because people are trying to circumvent the bad ammo economy. Sorry.
Fine, which is a bit weird. This is because you're swapping weapons here that use the same ammo type. It's green sniper and green fusion rifle, right? That's the ammo they're taking. I'm just calling it green ammo.
Yeah, if it's 1-to-1, you're fine. If it's like a primary to a special weapon, not only do you just lose that ammo, if you're choosing to swap from a kinetic to a primary to a special, it's going to wipe ammo anyways. You're not going to gain ammo for the special. It's just gone in PvP. And in PvE, it's the same thing. But now you're also going to lose your ability energy. That's where it's happening, is when you go from primary to special, it's going to change. I'm going to fast forward a little bit.
So even though if you swap exotic helmet,
we missed some key words here.
You can swap from an exotic helmet to a legendary helmet without any problems. But if you then swap from the legendary helmet back to the exotic helmet, then it's violative.
Yes.
Which is weird, right? And finally,
I mean, it's not weird because, again, the whole point is that they want you, you're not going to really be able to abuse things in the legendary slot, because it's just legendary. What it is the exotic and the perk that it gives. So that's why it's not weird. I don't know why they let you. I don't see a world where there's a benefit to swap off your exotic if you're not swapping into another exotic, but into legendary, it's like,
Finally, for our little pop quiz here, before we just explain the rules, if you've got an exotic class item and you swap to an exotic class item, is that violative for NotSwap? 3, 2, 1. The answer is, weirdly, not violative.
I know why. I didn't know that was the case. And I think Bungie didn't realize it either. It's because NotSwap is an old modifier. Exotic class items did not exist when they created NotSwap. And they have not changed or modified or tweaked the perk to register exotic class items. That's why. That's why. It's just an old, outdated modifier that has had no like the rest of parts of the game. Bungie hasn't touched it in years. So that's why.
So even though if you swap exotic helmet to exotic helmet,
now there's a good chance after this video that they do modify it for PvE and maybe even PvP, now that they know. Let's be honest, they touch things and they try not to look back if they don't have to. Okay, I'm just gonna fast forward.
For example, you've got any of those slots drains all ability energy. Okay.
I don't feel like we need a play-by-play. I like that he's explaining it for people who don't know, but he's got it. Swapping legendary to exotic drains all ability. Swapping any weapon to any other with a different ammo type. Yeah, so it's essentially what we know. I just want to see what his logic of whether it's good or bad is.
Was just for PvP, okay? PvE
Yep.
didn't have anything like that. It just had loadout locking, but none of this NotSwap business in PvE. And so we fast forward here to 2025, and what do you expect happens now that loadout swaps are in the game? Well, people start using them to their advantage. So a really common little rotation, for example, and I've only played Warlock, so I can only give an example like this. Can't give you any on Titan or Hunter, I'm afraid, but you might start out on Cenotaph Mask
for support,
generate ammo for your team, right, as you play. Then you might swap over to Lunafaction Boots, and as soon as you swap over to those, you'll then place your well, right? And that will mean that you get the benefit of the Lunas for the duration of the well. But then, while the well's active, you might then swap to Sanguine Alchemy, and that's going to mean...
I'm going to give a hot take. The problem isn't going from support and then going to DPS for swaps. This is the problem. I think there's nothing wrong if you're swapping your loadout because you're playing support, going through the encounter, you're playing support, and then it's time to get to DPS. You swap to DPS, and then you just stay on that DPS build. I think that's okay. I do think switching 3 different exotics to activate the perks to benefit you, that's cheesy. And I agree, that's a problem. In the sense that it does push the game beyond its beyond what it's intended. But again, this is like a 1% problem. Not everyone's going to be swapping through 30 loadouts to cheese encounters. They're just not. It's not the larger group of the community. It's like the 1%. I think if they made it to where there's a downtime for swapping, like if I was doing support, it's getting ready to DPS, then I use my free swap. You know, there's no downtime. I swap to Sanguine, and there's like a 2-minute or a minute cooldown. I think that would solve most of the problems, because most encounters don't last longer than a minute or so, depending on what boss you're fighting, because usually it's very, very quick DPS phases. I think that would solve a lot of the problems. And I think even console players who have an issue with loadout swapping, there is no shot that you can tell me that they can run Xeno, take a couple minutes to load up their menu, swap to DPS, do DPS, and then go reset, you know, back to the encounter the way it is, swap back to their support or their whatever build they're doing, and then continue to play. Console players can do that easily. I know, because I literally play on control. I had played on controller, on mouse and keyboard now only, even in PvP. But you can absolutely do it on mouse, on controller. And you do feel, it does feel sluggish and slow compared to PC, where you can hot swap. Bungie removes the middle part where we're flicking stuff back and forth during DPS. I feel like they'll be fine. But I think punishing players for playing one build for support leading up to a DPS counter, and then swapping to DPS and staying on DPS and doing the damage, I think that's the problem with NotSwap. You account for the middle part, I think you're okay. The multi 3-4 different exotics, I don't know what they actually do. I know they do like two exotics usually, but I think this is where people have an issue. This is fine. Running support, swapping to DPS, people are probably fine with it, even console players. What most people have a problem that I've seen is you shouldn't be in your menu for like 30 seconds flicking. I'm activating this, then I'm flicking to this, activating that, I'm getting the buff from this. That's what people have a problem with. Most people don't have a problem with, okay, my team is supporting me, now we're swapping to DPS, one and done, we're good. I would also argue that a solution could be, and I know this is his video, but I'm putting my thoughts in there, as we probably going to fast forward a little bit. I think if Bungie put tokens, like a token system, you get one free token pass during like an encounter to swap your gear. That would be interesting. I don't know. I really do think it just needs a cooldown, in my honest opinion. Or like a modifier that gives it a cooldown. Don't actually cool down the rest of the game, or you're going to piss everyone off.
That you just get more DPS, right? Like your Surge is going to do more damage. On old gen consoles, when you console players, and I want to be clear, it's not all console players once again, but on old gen console,
I'm gonna qualify. I'm gonna avoid overgeneralizing. I'm gonna do him better. It is some of the old gen, and it is also some of the new gen that doesn't like it, because they're not able to compete with PC. And here's my big honest opinion: console players who want to do the world's first race, you will never win if you're on old gen, but you will generally, if you're on console, you will never win world's first. It will never happen. It will never happen. And I know that pisses people off. It's a reality, because PC has multiple benefits that console can't do. It's just, let's be honest. The moment people realize that increasing your frame rate had its benefits, of certain things, like, are we forgetting 1,000 voices, 1K? You know, we forget that its damage was being boosted by frame rate. Yeah, like PC has always had some kind of advantages. That's why my personal belief is that console players should have their own contest raid race, but Bungie will never do that, because it's going to piss all the 1%ers and feel like, oh, well, then it's not as prestigious, because it's not one team that wins, now it's two. And I listen, I'm not involved in the world's race. All I can say is say the quiet part out loud. Console will never win world's first as long as PC players exist.
When you go and pull up your menu in the game to do your loadout swap, it just takes a little longer to load. Like, it takes longer to load the menu itself and swap over. And so if you're on old gen, that can be a bit console players, is the person he's meant to be again.
I know he's spitting out some good juice. I'm also reacting, and I'm trying to save it some time.
Game about fighting big bad monsters.
Hold on. What is that?
People don't like loadout swap. they did bring out that kind of feature, but that's, I think, a fear at least of some console players. So that console player cohort on old gen may not like
even new gen
loadout swapping for that reason. That's one group. The second reason people don't like loadout swapping is because it does mean that you have a little bit of menu gameplay, right? That's kind of the loving term that the Destiny community.
I have never heard anyone use the term menu gameplay. I feel like that's a self-report. That's you. If you unironically use the name menu gameplay, you are you're self-reporting. Also, I would like to argue like games like Dark Souls where you have an inventory. Usually, you can use like even on controller, which is what I usually play Dark Souls on. When you're activating, like trying to activate potions or healing items, the menu is on the screen itself. You don't have to actually go into a separate menu. And that's just how Destiny is kind of poorly optimized, is people go in the menu because they have to go in the menu. If you gave them a different UI interaction, they would do it on the fly, like activating certain things. But, and even like Diablo 4, they have potions and stuff that you don't have to actually go into your menu for unless you're swapping gear around, which guess what? People swap gear around a lot.
Uses. Essentially, Destiny's meant to be a game about fighting big bad monsters like aliens in space, terrifying, but also really invigorating to do so. But hold on, big bad monster, I just need to actually go into my menu, yep, scroll along, click my loadout, okay, close.
You can tell he doesn't know anything about D1. You're explaining the D1 experience. That is the D1 experience. Hey guys, hold on, guys. Hold on. Before we do DPS, I gotta pop an ammo simp to get ready for DPS. All right, everyone pop their ammo simps. All right, let's go to the platform and do boss DPS. That's how, and it's still kind of that way. Everyone's like, okay, I've got to swap my stuff. I gotta pick up some ammo bricks that I see on the ground. All right, everyone got your ammo? Yeah, we're equipped. Okay, let's go.
The menu, and now I can fight the monster again, right? It interrupts things a little bit. There's a clunkiness to that. And granted, there's a devil's advocate point to be made here, which is that before loadout swapping was introduced in Lightfall, people were still loadout swapping. They were just doing it.
We've been doing loadout swapping since Destiny 1. People who think that this is a new issue for Destiny 2 because of loadouts, yeah, they have no idea what they're talking about.
So they were going into their menu, they were clicking one by one and just sitting there for like 10 seconds going, yeah, well, 15 seconds, yeah, I'm still swapping. Just hold on, big bad boss. I'll be there eventually. Okay, I'm done now. Now I can shoot the boss, right? So in some ways, loadout swapping has reduced the amount of menu gameplay that people used to.
It's one of those things. Here's the reality. It has increased the quality of life for majority of the player base, allowing you to skip some of that menu gameplay. Whereas it's one of those the rich get richer situations where the 1% who do some crazy crap, they're benefiting the least from this. And I say least is because they were probably already doing quick swaps. Hell, I think people were using macros to swap stuff. Just do and hit a button and mid gameplay, it's doing it for you just as quickly as possible. Maybe not absolutely non-console, by the way, but on PC, like people were who were trying to min max, try to do things fast. They have max DPI to click buttons. Like, let's not act like it overly blew up. The first percent, like the first percenters were already good players. That's what I'm saying. The rich got richer. They're already good players, and now they're getting a little bit more benefit from swapping. Whereas the majority of the community, it increased the rate of being outside your menu. Like the quality of life for the majority of the community has been more positive than negative if we're looking at the pros and cons.
Have because they were already swapping previously, but in other ways it does mean that there are now people that will jump into the game and every single time they get to a DPS phase they're swapping. Sometimes they're even swapping multiple times in a DPS phase, and so that's where,
which is not normal,
this whole menu gameplay kind of term comes from. And I think it's totally valid to be like, you know, time in their loadouts right now kind of fiddling things around. This will just make their quality of life easier, right? They didn't intend for this to be the ultimate end game of what the true final point of the skill,
which I think is funny Because again, people were doing this anyways. People were popping their Celestial Nighthawk and then swapping their Celestial Nighthawk for another exotic and popping their golden gun. This is nothing new. The rate that it happens is new. It is definitely faster, but people were already doing exotic swaps during DPS phases. It was already happening. Now, is it happening maybe one or two more times than it normally would if you were just chilling in your menu, manually doing it? Absolutely. We can absolutely agree that it is increased the ability to do it even faster, allowing for more swaps than what was probably being able to be done.
Ceiling was for high-end Destiny players.
Thank you.
To be honest,
it's
that
a high
kind of is where we're at. If you are a top 0.0001% player, like if you are genuinely vying for placement in a contest raid race and you're trying to be top 100, you're very likely going to be using loadout swapping, because the difference between your time and another team's time could be a matter of...
And I like that he's pointing it out. I'm disappointed that I don't know, maybe he'll say it and I'll give him time to say it, that he's not pointing out the fact that majority of the community isn't actually benefiting from this. It is, Bungie is wanting to, make this modifier a mainstay, but it's not just the 1% that's going to be playing this mode that's going to have NotSwap. So you're essentially tweaking the game based on 1% of the actual overall community, even though it's only 1% of the community that's really abusing or benefiting from it, whereas most people will never have the same issues.
Seconds or minutes, and a single loadout swap really might make the difference in that scenario. So the devs didn't mean for this to be where we've ended up. Designing encounters without, that's going to mean that all the loadout swappers trivialize the experience, right, for themselves. They have an easier time than the devs intend, because they can get themselves an extra 30%, 40%, 50%, 70% damage just from doing a loadout swap or two. So that doesn't sound...
You also know how you change that? You make it to where you swap an exotic, you lose the benefit of that exotic. Yeah, I know that's crazy, right? How do we make it to where people aren't swapping exotics constantly? Like they're stacking up all these benefits? I don't know. Maybe we just change it to where if you swap one exotic, it doesn't carry over. Like Luna's, I didn't even know that was a thing. But if Luna stays, maybe you should make it to where it doesn't stay. Who would have thunk?
Great, but then the alternative for the devs is to say, okay, we know that this is the peak of the skill ceiling now, so we'll design our hardest encounters for those people, right?
And that's the problem. They're focusing... Listen, it is one of those situations where if your 1% is ruining the game for themselves, that's a you problem. Are they going to bitch about it? Absolutely, but fuck them. If you're causing your own, you're digging your own grave, that's your own problem, bud. Like, why are we making encounters for a very small percentage, especially when the population is already shrinking and dwindling? Why are you making the game focused on the 1%? It makes no sense.
We'll design it to that level of DPS, that level of...
Which is stupid.
I don't want to call it skill expression necessarily in this case, but that level of damage for sure. And the problem then is that anyone not loadout swapping, because it does objectively mean that you have higher DPS if you do the right swaps. If you're someone that doesn't loadout swap, you're basically screwed. You have to loadout swap at that point if the encounters...
I just want him to point out that that's the problem with Bungie right now. Is that's the game design, their philosophy is we're gonna look at the 1% and then make everything revolving the 1% and making everything else worse for everyone else. It just doesn't make sense, man.
Are tuned to specifically before,
and it's not even like Destiny has esports or some competitive scene that people actually give a shit about, where Bungie's trying to look good. Like, it's just literally just a small pocket and niche of people that play Destiny now. And you're still focusing on the 1% versus the majority of the people who actually play the game. That isn't a job, right? You're looking at content creators and all these streamers who play the game as a job. They get paid for it. You should not be focusing on those people at all.
people who are loadout swapping. And that's problematic, right? It's problematic both ways you look at it. You don't want to force people into it necessarily. You want people to be able to play the game their own way. But at the same time, if you don't design for it, then players kind of always have an option.
No. The 1%, not players. You're putting everyone in the group. It is literally the 1% that's abusing it.
Plus 50% damage bump that they can give themselves just to clear your encounter easily, let's say. So those are some reasons why people don't like it, right? What about some reasons why people do like it? This first one we've actually sort of already mentioned is that people were already swapping.
Thank you.
Right? Like if players are already doing it, clearly they're gravitating towards maximizing.
Isn't it crazy that a new player like Milo, who isn't being blinded by toxic positivity or emotional reaction, and it's all based on logic, he sees it. Yes, people were swapping before loadouts. It's not this magical little thing that just suddenly changed the game forever. No, people were already swapping since D1.
Their DPS, like really truly min-maxing those final couple of percents. And if that's already happening, but in a way that is interrupting the gameplay even more, and then you introduce a way to reduce the amount of time that takes them in the menus, that seems pretty positive, right? And that's...
He gets it. He gets it more than some of a chunk of the Destiny community, and then Bungie themselves. He gets it.
Kind of in line with just sort of Destiny ethos, I guess, overall. Like, we spend so much time in this game grinding for the perfect roll on a weapon, grinding for the best possible roll on your, like, resil and your discipline and all that stuff on your armor. Like, these are tiny, teeny percentage gains, right? And so loadout swapping is just in line with the exact same philosophy of trying to absolutely maximize those gains from...
It's insane he gets it.
The stuff that you've grinded for. It also means that you're not only using some of that stuff that you've grinded so hard for, but you're using it in combination with even more stuff that you've already grinded for as well. You can connect things in ways that you otherwise wouldn't have ever been able to do. The build thing that I think is worth mentioning here as well is that I actually also just do really think it's fun to be able to build craft in that kind of way and be like, oh my God, I can use this to...
I'm going to say I've watched a couple speed runs, like how the hell do people, because I always wanted to see about doing like maybe like a low man, like a solo, something like Nezarec. Like a lot of people it seems like Nezarec is the easier of the things to do. People have also done, and I say easy, and that's very asterisk because people spend hours practicing and doing it. But out of like all the things outside of if you're cheesing Crota and flinging him off the map, like obviously that's probably easier, and I've already done it. So I've already soloed Crota for the meme of Destiny 1 because I soloed D1. Yeah, I mean it does look fun, and the mental thinking and processing and planning it out. Like, I'm swapping to this. I'm making ammo on this. Like I've watched people do solo Witness, and they're making a bunch of bricks. They're trying to do DPS, and then you see this random ad throw something, and they blow themselves up, and then they rinse it back. Just it is exciting to see all these swaps and rotations, and it's this really big mental game, and that's why I know, and I can very confidently say, majority of the community is not playing the way that these 1%ers that this is their life. Destiny is their life. Some of them are streamers, they make money off it. Some of them are just really dedicated to playing the game in general. And so they do these challenges because that's all they do. It's not like I'm going to solo Witness and crunch the numbers, and then I'm going to go play, Pokemon, right? They may on their off time. These are people that are dedicated to Destiny, and they've just turned it into a craft, and they're cut above the others. Like, I played for 10K hours, and I still haven't done some of the things these speedrunners and these low mans have done, because I play also a lot of other games, and I'm not just dedicated to just being a master at Destiny and some of the PvE content, and that's fine. And no hate to these people. That's how they want to spend their time. That's their right. They're having a good time, and it's fun. Like at the bomb, it's fun, and it's fun to watch it. It's just this really complex situation that they do, and you don't see it in a lot of games. Like I mentioned Diablo 4, yeah, you can swap gear, but not to the extent that these 1%ers are doing in Destiny. And it's just this crazy mental strategic game of mastering the mechanics, minimizing threat, and then just optimizing your DPS. It is crazy, but you can't use that as the template for your entire game, or you're going to kill your game.
To do this and then combo it with that over here and do that as a new. And also they might say like, okay, you're saying it's raising the skill ceiling, but like you're just like pressing F1 and clicking a loadout. Like that's not skill, right?
I think that's a fair argument. It is not a skill to swap loadouts. I think planning loadouts, having your loadouts and planning all your mods and weapons, I think that being able to swap between that takes no skill. What takes skill is knowing when to swap to what. The mental game of, okay, I'm in this situation, I need to swap to this loadout, and then I'm going to activate this, then I'm going to swap at this. The timing and the process. Hitting a button, not a challenge. Knowing when to do it, how to do it, why are you doing it. All these are very, very important parts of speedruns and low mans. And that's what makes it, that part makes it more skillful than someone like me who's who's making MO with the Cenotaph Warlock, and then before we get onto the platform to do DPS against Witness, I swap to my DPS Sanguine Alchemy for his point, and I go up there, drop my will, and just do DPS. That is the most commonly used swap. You may see people use Nighthawk and then swap into a different exotic and then do DPS. Like that might be something that also happens. But typically, you're not going to see what you see in these high-end players who are doing really crazy challenges.
Like that's not skillful. And then another person might come in and say, hold your horses there. It is skillful because you had to go through the whole thought process of setting up the loadout in the first place, right? Like obviously just pressing F1 isn't skillful, but I have the build saved. And to save the build, I had to think through exactly what it was going to be.
And I think, yes, but I feel like it's most of these encounters, like low mans, are solved. So people just tell you what you should have, and you base that off of that. So it's not hard to, unless you're just trying to do it blind, then sure, you're self-challenged. But if I wanted to try to do Nezarec, I could go copy someone else's loadout pretty confidently. But that doesn't mean I'm going to pilot that correctly. That's the difference. Being able to pilot takes a lot of skill.
I had to do the build crafting. That's skill expression in itself. And on top of that, a build that takes into account all the items in the game and uses 50 of them to chain together a sick, weird, wild combination,
yep.
Swapping and swapping. That is always going to be more complex than a scenario where you look at all the things in the game and you just pick your 10 of them or whatever on your armor and your weapons, and that's it. Like, it's always more complex when you loadout swap, and I would argue that more complexity means there is more room for skill expression and a higher skill ceiling as a result. But then,
which is why you only see mostly 1% players play it, right? And then that's why they can solo content that is not intended. Bungie never intended for people to solo raid bosses.
The other person might come back in again and be like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but hear me out. If you're a loadout swapper, you're actually making the encounters easier for yourself just by clicking a button in your loadout. You're just clicking F1 and clicking new loadout. And that means that you have to show less skill in the encounter itself to get the clear, because you've just got a free 50% damage boost. So like, you don't need to actually be good, right? So you're making out like you're more skillful.
I think that's not true. Just because you have damage, I've learned contest mode content and hard mode content. Just because I'm going to give you an example. I did King's Fall, and my clan, we had to get one random dude. This guy, every time we wiped, would have the best damage, but he was a stupid player. He was a bot. We were on the War Priest, getting ready for DPS. We're getting ready for DPS. This crackhead, and he had to be a crackhead or something, walked all the way behind the War Priest because he saw a brick on the ground, which is funny because, again, shoot to loot exists. Apparently no one uses it for this reason. But he ran behind the War Priest on contest mode and died and we had to wipe. But he always had top DPS. Just because you have good DPS doesn't make you a good player, and it doesn't mean you're going to get through the contest day one. Like, I felt like even though he was great for DPS, we did everything we could to make sure that he did not interact with any of the mechanics. He was just that bad of a player, just incompetent, incapable. She's just a god at DPS, and we just want him to shine there. Let us do the rest while you just do what you're doing. And for all I know, maybe he was cheating. He was using a net limiter. I don't know. But I think that perfectly exemplifies the fact that just because you can do all these fancy things to get more DPS doesn't mean the challenge just goes away. It doesn't mean it's a free, easy mode. You're going to get through the counter. If you're already a really good player, you're just eating more. Rich get richer. But for the majority of the community, that is not going to be the case.
But really, your gameplay in the moment doesn't need to be more skillful. It can be less skillful and you can still clear. So, like, it goes both ways, dude. Like, there really is a massive debate about this. I really can't stress enough how divided the community is on it. Like, I feel like it really is like 50% on both sides. So with well, that makes sense, because if you were to look at it, you have console players, which takes up a small amount, and then you have PC, which now takes up a small amount. That's pretty much the whole community. So 50-50 makes about sense. But that's me being me joking. I know that not every console player gives a rip about loadout swapping. Debate explained a little bit. I think that's the problem kind of identified. Let's now move a little bit closer to stream. They announced there is a new event coming in.
I'm going to skip this. We already know.
Dungeons. I haven't. I'm going to be blind sold 50% down.
Oh,
bit by
DMG.
Bit. So
Dude, I hope he dissects and just really points out the flaws in DMG's argument.
DMG says, we often hear complaints on difficulty in high-end content feeling easier thanks to swapping from build to build during DPS phases.
Yeah, the 1%.
And then he kind of gives an example. I can juice my super with plus 50% damage via exotic armor, and then swap everything around to the perfect loadout to juice my weapons with 0 cost. And that is fair. That is true. This is giving players far greater damage output than expected and messing with difficulty / experiences.
And here's the thing. People were already doing this. Just, he makes it to where you couldn't swap 1 damage exotic for something else. People were doing that already.
By pushing players into UI mid-combat. NotSwap.
And again, I want to emphasize, this problem would be eliminated if you couldn't stack effects like that. I can juice my super. Well, maybe you should make it to where it no longer is juiced when you remove that exotic. That is a Bungie development issue, not a player issue. That is a you issue.
Like an opportunity to add an amount of cost and push players to make harder choices and trade-offs, or develop team-wide synergies to maximize DPS. This feels more approachable than locked loadouts, and just a kind of caveat as well as a heads up, Rights of the Nine will ship with NotSwap, and any feedback that they receive here will be looked at for tuning further out. So no matter what happens, we're getting NotSwap for Rights of the Nine, at least at the beginning.
Yeah, it's like, hey guys, F you, we're still doing it.
Beginning. So to like TLDR that for you very quickly, Bungie thinks that high-end content is too easy because of swaps, and so they're making Ultimatum contest plus NotSwap to account for this potential problem of it being too easy. So that's now the problem explained, and this is Bungie's proposed solution. We can now start to break
will not actually solve some of the main issues.
Down and analyze whether or not this solution is actually going to benefit the game and benefit the pain points that current players are experiencing. To do this, we're going to actually break down DMG's tweet here, because I think it gives us some quite interesting insights about what's going on. The first one is that it's going to ship with NotSwap no matter what, so we can just kind of get that into our heads now. We're not being ignored if it ships and it still has it active. It just means that they're taking feedback on for a later date. Next, let's talk about how it...
I feel like if the fact that we didn't have this conversation until now, like, I feel like they could have had You know, the problem is Bungie doesn't ask the community, what do you think about future content, the PvE content with NotSwap? Like, what happened to just asking your community, like spitballing and throwing it out there? No, see, that's the problem with Bungie, is that they want you to play how they want. They want you to play how they want you to play, not how you want to play. And that's the biggest problem with Bungie as a company and just Destiny that people have, is that it is very anti play how you want. And it's more of the company wants you to play how they want you to play. That is not a video game. Like, imagine Dark Souls, all these people who have these glass cannon builds that just cheese and destroy bosses. Imagine if the developer was like, no, we're going to make it to where you can't do that. Sure, they nerf and balance stuff like any other game does, but they intentionally went out of their way to limit some of these, limit your ability to do these builds. They lock you out essentially to where you can't do it. Sorry. Nope. You have to play how we want. We don't want you to do glass builds, or we don't want you to use tanky builds. We don't want you to use any of that. We're going to make sure you play these very specific meta builds that are the way we want the game to be played. Not how you want to express yourself and be creative. We don't want you to have build diversity. We want you to play the builds we want you to play. And that's the problem with this mentality coming from Bungie, is it's not actually solving any problems, and it's not actually making things challenging.
It messes with difficulty/experiences by pushing players into UI mid-combat. Like we said before, this is menu gameplay,
which is something that was happening since D1.
As described by the Destiny community. And I think all of us can agree on this, that it is a little clunky, right? And I guess another devil's advocate point on it that I didn't mention earlier in the video is the one sort of saving grace of the clunkiness is that most of the time, and this isn't all the time by any means, there are exceptions here, but most of the time, you're going to be loadout swapping between your mechanics phase and your DPS phase.
Thank you.
For example, Sunder Doctrine, Encounter 3, because that's the only one I can really reference here. You enter your code, you get the fiery room, you're kind of waiting 10 seconds for Kevin to start coming out and attacking you, and while you're waiting, you can switch over to your damage loadout, right? Perfect example of how you're kind of in a lull, so you're not missing a huge amount of gameplay. So yeah, it's a little
It's crazy that a new player is able to show that, by the way. Like, even the Witness, when you go to do DPS and Salvation's Edge, everyone goes into the middle, and there's people, only like 2 people will be shooting the buttons at a time. During the time that people are shooting buttons, and even after you shoot buttons, you have to wait for the platform to raise, which is enough time. Even if you're not doing loadout swapping, you can go and manually change items within that allotted time, because you're just sitting there waiting for it to rise up. Like, I don't understand this whole insincerity from Bungie, making it like, oh, this is an issue that's just, it's breaking the game. Even though you literally make encounters that have downtime, like Salvation's Edge Witness Fight, where people are just sitting there twiddling their thumbs. What do you think they're going to do? Not try to optimize?
Clunky, but you'd be staring at a wall anyway, so what's the big deal, right? That's kind of the argument there. Still, I think that less clunkiness would be good overall. That's a valid position to take. Next, I want to take a look at this top bit here, where he says, we often hear complaints on difficulty in high-end content feeling easier thanks to loadout swapping, okay? This is really worth breaking into chunks, okay? So we're going to start with just this first bit saying,
dissect it, baby.
Hear complaints on difficulty in high-end content, okay? High-end content feeling easier, right? What exactly is high-end content? For me, the first thing I think of is contest mode, right? It's the top of the top. It's the creme de la creme of Destiny. It's really the hardest thing in there. But what's a little weird about this is that in my experience, I've not seen really anybody complaining about contest difficulty scaling this whole time I've been in the Destiny community, this past month, right?
No one. That's, again, no one's complaining about the contest mode, which is the pinnacle of challenge.
Like, it seems like the impression I have correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, is that everything after Ron, not including Ron, but everything after Ron has had a pretty well-tuned contest experience. That seems to be the...
Yeah, I would agree. Like, if I think of Crota, like, a lot of people struggled, even though people kind of figured out, okay, this is D1 raid. Crota was no slouch. Contest mode Crota, like, the fact that he could hit your well twice and destroy well and bubble, like, you can use the most pro-typical strats. People were relying on, actually, blocking the damage, trying to stay alive, using healing grenades to make sure that you're the two sword runners who are going to kill his shield, making sure they stay alive, dropping a well. Like, it was very intense. And so contest mode, for most of the content we've had, has actually been challenging.
Overall opinion. I'm sure there are some people that disagree, but generally that seems to be the sentiment that I've seen, right? And I think if we look at what happened with Ron wasn't too easy just because of loadout swapping, right?
No.
Ron was too easy because it was too simple. And I haven't played Ron.
It was too simple. It was too, like, the mechanics were pathetic. There was, and that's some of the biggest problem, is that, are the mechanics themselves hard? No? Well, then that's going to cause even the contest mode to not be hard at all.
To be clear, so I'm getting secondhand information here, but the reason I'm sort of asserting this is because I've got this plan to solve all of the raids in the game and all the dungeons. First ever clear of the raid, by the way, to duo it with the complaints on difficulty on high-end content that DMG is often hearing to people playing contest. I don't think that's where those are coming from. So it then makes sense to say, okay, let's go one down the food chain. Where else could those complaints be coming from? The first thing my mind jumps to is GMs. I don't know if you guys think that's silly, but, like, to me, that seems like pretty high-end content. But that...
No. Grandmasters is the next hardest thing in PvE. Like, if you try to say a dungeon's harder than a Grandmaster, you're self-reporting yourself.
That also can't be what he's referring to here, because there is no loadout swapping in GMs, because your loadout is fully locked, right? So it has to be from somewhere else. So then the next high-end content I think of is, like, maybe Master Raids? But I feel like nobody plays Master Raids. Like,
not anymore! I mean, they farm what they can and then they're out, like...
There's no one doing that, right? So if he's often hearing complaints, is he hearing those often complaints from a room of, like, 4 people that can't even get a full fire team to do a master raid? Like,
yeah, it's the 4 people that he's friends with and Bungie's friends with because they don't play their own game.
So, right? So we've got to go one down the food chain still, like, again.
Damn. Milo unintentionally throwing shade at Bungie and the 4 people still playing master content. Damn. But that is a problem. Like, master content is probably some of the most unused. Like, you talk about base raids, master content's probably on the bottom barrel of everything in the game. Master content is probably on the, except for maybe master dungeons and very specific ones where it's easy to farm encounters for artifice armor. Right now, outside of that, like, master content is probably the most underused content, which is why Bungie doesn't even make master, like, seasonal content. It's just expert at this point.
And we've just got to go at that point to regular raids. Now, I think this is a question in itself, right? Would a regular raid count as high-end content? I think if you're a less experienced player, yes. I think if...
I want to say for majority of the community, and the fact that raids and even to some degree dungeons statistically are the most underused, and I would say dungeons are more used than raids. Content in the game, yes, they are in game, especially if you were to look at Salvation's Edge. Even at the regular base, people struggle with, like, the 4th encounter. It's often called the LFG killer because it is challenging on its own. The mechanics itself is challenging. And that is the thing that Bungie needs to do. But I also feel like they should make a nice balance. You want things challenging, but you also don't want an encounter being known as the LFG killer.
If you're a top 0.5% player, you might look at a regular raid, not on contest, and be like, is that high end? I thought that was meant to be like a kind of chill experience where I could just like farm some loot. Like, there's going to be some debate there, right?
I would say that's dungeons. Most people would say you can farm dungeon encounters pretty chilly.
I'm going to let you guys fight that battle with each other in the comments section. I'm going to sit on the fence for that one. But at least for the time being, I can't think of anything else easier thanks to swapping from build to build during DPS phases.
Yes.
Now, I have to ask, if that is indeed happening, why aren't those regular raid players just going and playing Master Raid?
He gets it! Holy shit, he gets it! Why? That is the biggest complaint that I have with people who bitch about, making content easier for some of the average players. And it's not even me. Like, that is why there's master content. That's why there's higher difficulty content. People bitching about the game being too easy don't even half the time, those same people don't even interact with the master versions. They don't. And so, but they're the same people bitching about a base raid being too easy. It is insane. He's a new player, yet he already knows the hypocrisy and stupidity of the Destiny community.
Because they're definitely not doing that, right? Like, we know that is not happening.
We know it's not happening.
Is it because master raids are difficult and they don't want the difficult thing? Well, it can't be that, because they're saying that this is too easy. They want more of a challenge, right? That'd be like a little hypocritical, right? So
no. There is a large portion of those vocal minority that are hypocrites. That's the funny part.
Could it be the rewards?
Not all of them. I'm not doing a broad brush and overgeneralizing. I'm saying there is a pocket of hypocrites.
Aren't good enough for master raids, so they're like, why would I bother? Even though it would be more fun, why would I bother? Is it?
Dang, and that's a good point. They want normal to be harder, but they're not good enough as players to be able to do master.
They can't get a team together for master raids
True.
because there's just genuinely nobody else playing them. It could be that could be it. Or maybe, for all we know, it could be the weekly rotator surges means that they feel a little bit forced into playing with a specific loadout for the...
He gets it. Holy crap, he gets it. Which is why I hate surges in Destiny. Like, raids overall, I think they removed surges from base raids, but like master content, like, I truly think adding surges to Destiny was one of the worst things that Bungie has ever done. It is a shitty modifier that does not promote build crafting. It does the opposite. And it causes people not wanting to interact with a content within that certain week if you've got bad surges. Like, if it's all void and you're like, well, I don't want to have to run a void warlock because I need well for master, so I'm just not going to interact with it. And yes, you could say, well, you could still do it. You just you could still run it. It doesn't really matter. But that's not how Destiny players think. They're going to min-max and they're going to go for the easiest time possible. They're going to min-max to get the outcome that they want, which is success. And if there is a chance of failure and it's based on modifiers, people are going to avoid it.
Those masters.
I know we don't like to speak about the quiet parts, but Destiny players will go for the cheesiest, easiest, and guaranteed pathway to success. And if it's not as easy and it's harder and they know they can just wait a week or wait another rotation and they're going to have an easier time, that's what they're going to do. They're just not going to waste their time interacting with content at a higher rate and go to something else that's easier and farm that instead and then come back later. That is Destiny 2 community in a nutshell.
Master raids, and they don't want that, right? But then it's like, okay, hold on. Now is it a little hypocritical to say, I don't want to play the master raid, which is harder because it makes me use a specific loadout, but I do want regular raids to make me use a specific loadout?
Welcome to Destiny 2, Milo. Welcome to Destiny 2.
Not sure if that necessarily makes a lot of sense, but again, I'm trying to understand why those players would just not be jumping into master raids when they're right there, right? Whatever the case may be, all right, we've gone on a little tangent there, but whatever the case may be, they're evidently not happy. We don't need to necessarily understand their reasoning. They feel like loadout swaps just trivialize the experience in some way. Now let's look at this quote line. I'm going to do this one in green because otherwise it's going to be a little hard to sort of keep track of everything. This is the one that says, I can juice my super with plus 50% damage with exotic armor and then swap everything around to the perfect loadout to juice my weapons with 0 cost. This is an especially interesting line because it nails home the fact that the 0 cost is a problem for Bungie. Bungie is really acutely aware of the 0 cost element. Rather than seeing a loadout swap as an example of skill expression, they see it as being cheapened, I guess, by the fact that it doesn't have a clear trade-off. So,
and I just want to point out, can someone identify where loadouts is the problem of this? Can someone please identify where loadout swapping itself is the problem? And it's not just the fact that the system that's in play currently, like the fact that I can manually do it and still get the same effect. Like all of this doesn't change this at all. Like this will, but I'm saying like them trying to punish people for using loadout swapping doesn't solve the problem. Bungie is trying to find a band-aid solution to something that they just refuse to fix on their own, which is you should have an in-house penalty or removal of the effect for swapping your exotics. Like, what are we talking about?
Bungie kind of devalues it almost a little bit in their mind. And I think the people that like the swaps would basically just respond to that by saying, does there have to be a cost? Like, is the cost not the time that I put in to create the extra loadouts in the first place, to do that build crafting, to join those big-brained loadouts together?
I think this is the first argument where I'm going to have to side against Milo. I don't think that's a cost. You're choosing to do it for your own benefit. It's not a cost to make loadouts. It really, really isn't. So I'm going to skip. I'm going to say that's a nothing burger argument. I can't believe I'm giving that to Bungie.
Sniper on your team, or the medic, or the tank. Like, that's not really what Destiny leans into at all times.
That's because Destiny's not an MMO. That's why. There you go.
And I think that's actually especially true for dungeons, right? The way that they design dungeons, they design those dungeons to be clearable by a solo player. And if you're a solo player, that means by definition, you're doing everything, right? You're doing a bit of everything in your loadout. And so the argument then would be that loadout swapping is just an extension of that same kind of DNA, right? Where you're not confined to one specific role. You're not only the healer, but actually, if you're someone that is healing, for example, with your speaker's sight, and then you want to do as much DPS as possible, you can switch over and be a little bit more DPS biased for that part of your damage phase. And you can do double duty, basically. But regardless of where you stand on this particular issue, because this one really does just go back and forth ad infinitum, I think we can all agree that what loadout swapping does do is it makes it more likely that you're going to clear an encounter. I think that is a fair statement overall. It makes an encounter easier because you do just open yourself up to flat damage boosts you wouldn't otherwise have.
I don't agree with he's making it sound like it's a make or break for completing an encounter. I disagree. Now, will it make it easier? Sure. But to pin it as it is a make or break situation for clearing an encounter, I do not agree. So we're going to skip ahead.
Problem here whatsoever. So first of all, we can talk about the menus thing. Players being pushed into the menus. Does NotSwap solve that problem? No. People are still going to be jumping into the menus because what they can do is they can go into the menu and without changing anything other than armor mods, they can switch from having their yellow special finisher armor mod over to having their surges, and that will not trigger NotSwap, so they'll keep all their abilities, but they'll then have surges for the duration of their DPS phase. And that's a 22% damage boost on any class, which is a pretty big deal for just clicking F1.
Which is why I thought adding those surges was also stupid. Like, Bungie complains about power creep. Why did you add surges? Like, in general, across the board. I don't understand why surges had to be a thing that exists in this game. It doesn't make sense.
And then clicking one of your loadouts. So people are still going to do that. Like, you're not preventing anyone from going into the UI by making this change. Also, like I said before, if you're a warlock and you've got maybe Lunas on, or you've got Sino on, or something like that, and you place your well, and then you switch to Sanguine, it doesn't really matter at that point. Which
is exactly what I'm going to do, baby. I'm going to be a well lock, even though I want to be a Titan. Actually, I might try Titan Sword. I'm going to... Contest mode, I'm probably not going to die, so let's do it, baby.
That you've lost your click, you've lost your class ability, like you've lost charge there, because the well's already down. So you're still going into the menu, you're still doing a loadout swap with actual armor being changed, but you're also just having the same experience that you were having before. You're getting your Sanguine damage boost, and you're kind of going about your day. Like, it's not really a big deal. So that's like 22% from the Surges swap, plus another 10%.
I'm going to skip ahead.
Swap is failing to prevent players from, as they said here, getting far greater damage output than expected.
Not changing it.
It seems to be failing to do so. So let's re-examine that one comment, right, about the far greater damage output. Maybe Bungie is actually fine with people getting the 22% from Surges, right? Let's just assume that to start with. And let's say that Bungie's method of approach there is to say, we're going to just assume people are not going into the UI to get those surges timed during damage phase, but maybe they're just, as a happy accident, gonna get those surges at damage, and that's all good, right? If that's the case, then with Sanguine on top, the total extra amount it's going to give you, because it's multiplicative, is about 21-ish%, I think, more damage on top of any boost that you're going to get from your well, from like a prismatic grenade, let's say, and from your surges, right? Sanguine's going to give you about 21% on top of those things. Do we count 21% damage as far greater damage output than expected? I don't think so.
Yeah. Like, it's not like we're going to... Yeah, I don't think so.
Probably not, right? At least in my view. So I asked my chat, I was like, what else might Bungie be referring to there? What is giving them far greater damage output than expected? And is it related to getting super damage, right? Because they mentioned that in the quote. And my chat mentioned 3 things. They mentioned Celestial Nighthawk, which buffs golden guns, and it gives you a 72% damage.
Which is a one and done.
Increase. Queer ass of the falling star.
I'm sorry. Queer what? What? I'm sorry. Curious. I'm pretty sure it's Curious, but Cuirass? What?
And that gives you a Thunder Crash buff at 55%, and a class item with Spirit of Star Eater Scales, and that buffs your super, and that's going to be 70%. That's that third one. So 72% Celestial, 55% Cuirass, and 70%.
Okay, he's got to be unironically doing it, and he's got to be doing it intentionally, right? He's doing it intentionally.
And class item, those are big boosts. Like, I think that is absolutely categorically far greater damage output than expected. And to NotSwap's credit, it obviously doesn't work with the class item, but
which is funny is that people were still going to use these exotics. They're still going to pop their super slam and then switch back. It's going to happen. Like, let's not act. Like, if you're running Celestial Nighthawk and you're on Solar, the only thing you'll miss is your grenade. But if you're running a gun with, like, Demolitionist, you're going to get your healing grenade back anyways. Let's be honest. A lot of these exotic reason people run these specific kits, it's not really going to change or really punish them as much as it does in PvP. Because, and that's something that no one's making the argument, like, either for or against NotSwap. Like, you could argue, okay, well, then you shouldn't have a problem with it. But my argument is, like, why waste the time trying to implement it in the first place if it's just a band-aid to the problem and it doesn't actually solve the problem that it's supposed to do. So it's a waste of time and resources, and just instead of actually making it challenging, they're just like, here's the band-aid. But realistically, we have enough energy regeneration and mods and just strats to get benefits on the rip. It's not hard.
The case of the Cuirass and the
He's doing it intentionally.
Celestial, yes.
I'm just going to skip it.
I also know that, for example, on Hunter, Hunters really care about having their Celestial. And so if you took that away from Hunters, they might feel like, well, my whole class kind of output, my class purpose is being reduced a little bit here and made a lot less exciting. So I totally understand that there might.
I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to get into must-have Galley or must-have Warlock Titan. That's going to become the meta. Bungie, again, this is what happens when you make shitty modifiers that handicaps and limits build diversity. You get it to where only the meta picks. Now, granted, people were already probably going to run meta, but this enforces that only meta is used. Like, before people ran, like, obviously are going to run meta for contest, but you still have the option to swap up and do what you want to do. Now you have no choice.
Might be some sort of detractors of that suggestion I've just made, but hopefully you can at least see my point that NotSwap is a very broad brush approach, whereas if they'd just done a more precise one, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation in the first place. Still,
but that takes time and effort, and Bungie's lazy.
There is also a chance that there are also other exotics that I just don't know about. That is happening is we are taking a problem from normal raids, assuming that's who DMG was referring to, having been complaining to him. We're taking a solution to a problem in normal raids, and we are applying that.
Here's what, again, when people are doing low mans and speed runs, it's on normal content, normal raids, normal dungeons, and they're basing it on the 1%.
To contest, which people are already pretty happy with, and by taking that solution and applying it to the contest mode, it's actually gonna further amplify a problem that contest mode does have right now that's separate to all the other stuff we've talked about so far.
Oh, what is it, baby?
Is ammo economy. The reason this—
Holy shiitake, he gets it. Dude, I was gonna skip ahead, but he gets it.
This is important, is in a regular, normal difficulty dungeon run, you can farm as much ammo as you want across as many DPS phases as you want because there's no enrage, right? Enrage is not coming for you. So you can just sit there and farm ammo for half an hour if you want with a heavy brick finder and a heavy scout. You can generate it for your team, and then you can jump into DPS. You could mess up the DPS, just farm again, jump into DPS, you're chilling, right? The time pressure is not really there. But on contest, it's a little different. You are going to hit enrage after 3 DPS phases. So you need to make the most of those DPS phases, right? And the in-betweeny bits, your mechanics phases or your ad clear phases or whatever, are going to be opportunities for you to farm that ammo, and you're going to need to be ammo efficient while you do so. Now, I haven't played these dungeons, so I don't know if you can spend like 20 minutes farming heavy ammo.
Prophecy. You can. And Prophecy, and like if you're talking about, let's talk about final bosses. The final boss, you can absolutely, the first boss, you can absolutely, and then the cube room, you can absolutely do it. And so most of Prophecy, you can take your time before you get to the actual DPS of the final boss. Spire of the Watchers, first encounter, doesn't matter. First boss, you can absolutely take your time. You just kill a bunch of stuff that spawns. You can farm off of the Minotaurs. Let's see, what other final boss, you can do it before you start actually doing DPS. You can go behind the blast shield and farm some stuff. Let's see, then Ghost of the Deep. You can farm the first boss. It's risque because it can be a little risque depending if you're working as a team. I was thinking about solo. Solo is where it's risque farming, but if you're as a team, farming is going to be pretty easy, especially on higher content if they have champions. The final boss, you do have to be careful of the boss itself. Outside of that, I do believe it's not going to be that hard to farm some of the areas, and you can also continue to farm. You can continue to farm the champions, or not the champions, the hive lights. You can farm those with Xeno and Xenotaph, all that stuff. So I feel like these are the easier of raids to kind of fish around for ammo. It's not going to be a fun experience, though. That's part of the problem, and it's just more annoying than it is a challenge.
Ammo in between your 3 damage phases if you're on contest. Like, I don't know if the game lets you do that or not, but let's also just recognize that that would be a really boring way to play the game.
By the way, I just want to point out, contest mode goes to the deep final boss. She's a bitch with how much health she has. I'm going to tell you right now, if that's the first, and it's not, it's going to be Spire. I think they advertised Spire is going to be the first one. Goes to the deep is probably going to be the bitch of the 3 because of the final boss having so much goddamn health. It is going to be a horrible experience, I feel like, just because of how tanky she is. If you do not have good ammo, if you can make some good ammo and farm ammo and you have just maximum DPS, it's a pretty lengthy DPS phase. You're just going to absolutely have to use meta stuff. And luckily, it's going to be linear fusion rifles, like Queensbreaker is probably going to be your go-to. The fact that you're able to pop heads on her, maybe with Div. I probably wouldn't use Div. I would just try to be good and land your headshots. But we'll have to see how it goes.
So let's assume that you don't want to do that, right? Let's assume that the ideal approach here would be for you to efficiently farm some ammo during the mechanics phase, and for you to then use that ammo during DPS and do as much damage as you can, right? In that scenario, loadout swapping actually serves a really important purpose and achieves something really cool, right? Which is that you can use a couple of different things, which we'll talk about in a second, to farm ammo more efficiently than just using a heavy brick finder. And then when you're done farming your ammo, you can then switch loadout to a DPS loadout or a healer loadout maybe, or just something else, so that you can play the game again in a bit more of a fun way, rather than just being focused on like being an ammo printer, right? So what are some of the things that you can use there? You can use Cenotaph Mask. That's going to let you mark mini bosses with your trace rifle. And when your teammates finish them, it will spawn in a heavy brick. There's Aeons with Sexual Insight. And that's going to mean that when you finish mini bosses, you create a small brick for your team, small heavy brick. And there's also the Alethanim weapon. It's a primary, I believe. And kills with that give you energy, essentially, which you can then use to generate either special bricks or heavy bricks. And I can't stress enough how essential they are to use in contest mode. Like, if you're not using them, you're just not going to get the heavy ammo, right? Like, it's going to suck. But they do also mean that your job is just to print ammo. Like, if you're just using Alethanim 24/7, you don't get to use any of the other fun exotics in the game. You just have to stand there and build energy to generate bricks. That's kind of dull, right? And so I think the issue with NotSwap,
it's a boring ass playstyle,
is it means that if you have a team where one person is now the dedicated, designated ammo printer, they are forced to either stay on ammo print duty the whole time and have a less fun time because they're just generating ammo for their team the whole time, or lose their super anytime they want to switch off ammo printing and have fun again. And especially because it's Alethanim, and I don't think that's even a particularly well-liked gun for other reasons too. It feels like
it's all right. It is fun. It's an exotic mountaintop, and its only benefit is that it makes ammo. Outside of that, most people would rather just use mountaintop.
Not an ideal way to play. And it feels like the wrong person is being punished there almost. Like, the ammo printer is doing a support role for their team. They are supporting their team in some way. They're foregoing their own enjoyment in order to make their team.
Isn't it funny that he's been talking for an hour and he's just spitting, outside of maybe one or two statements, he's been spitting facts, and he knows more about the game than Bungie does.
More powerful. I don't think that's the person that should be penalized in that moment. If anything, it should be the teammates, right? Like, in the same way that if a medic is healing someone, like, the medic should get some kind of benefit from that. Ideally, like, you get benevolence, for example, if you put a rift down and then someone walks into it. Great. You get a benefit for having given your team a benefit, right? Whereas with this, it's...
Which Speaker kind of does that. If you wear a Speaker mask and you heal your teammates, you get orbs printed, except it got nerfed. One, because of PvP, but also because Bungie didn't like that it gave that many orbs. So now it only heals you when you actually take damage, which I guess you could argue is fair. But being able to get orbs for healing people was kind of doing what he said. But it's not, that's kind of like the exception. It doesn't happen a lot.
It's like, oh, you're printing ammo for your team, stay that way and never have fun ever again. That feels like the wrong person to.
Wow. He just explained Bungie's narrative for the whole thing.
Be draining the super from at that point. Not that you should be draining the super from anyone else, but you hopefully see what I mean. Now, granted, DMG did say that they wanted to encourage teams to develop team-wide synergies. So maybe they do want an ammo printer player, a healer player, and a damage dealer, right? Maybe that is something that they foresee as being a fun trio to run with in these ultimatum dungeons. And honestly, to be completely frank with you, I think that sounds pretty cool as well. It sounds like something new in Destiny, and I'm open to new things. So I'm not completely...
The problem I have is that the game has been built in a certain way. So they're trying to force you to play in these playstyles, but the game isn't set up that way. Like, I've been trying desperately to promote my Titan Sword tank build, but a lot of the content isn't made for it. And when you do find it, it pops off. But in most content, it's not necessary because you're giving up damage. And if you give up damage, especially in contest mode where there is enraged now for dungeon, and even just like raids in general, if you're giving up DPS to be a tank, you're probably going to be kicked off the team.
Completely against the idea of slightly more roles-based activities in this way. I think that that might be interesting. The issue, I guess, is just that within the roles themselves, if you look at what the damage dealer has to offer, there's 30 exotics that the damage dealer could pick from for their build, right? Whereas for the ammo printer, it's like, okay, you're going to be using a Lithium, have fun with that, and you're going to be using Xeno or Aeons, have fun with that. I just don't really feel like that's going to be a fun thing to build craft. Like, that role seems like the short end of the stick. Do you know what I mean? And it's a shame also because none of this would be a problem, really.
Which is why no one wants to do it except for like the 1%. Everyone else is trying to get brute force it with DPS.
If the ammo economy wasn't problematic, right? Like, we are trying to fix the fact that the ammo economy is bad by putting a player on that role, where in most RPGs, I would say, you don't really have someone that's just like scavenging for the team while you fight. Instead, you have...
Imagine that. Other games had solved this problem a long time ago, but Bungie's still struggling.
Have like a tank and a healer. Like, the resource management is a little bit more on your usage of your mana and like your health and things like that, rather than having like a noble knight and then a smart wizard and then a little goblin that runs to the bank to pick up more resources and then runs back to give them to the rest of the team and then just runs back and forth for the whole fight, right? Like, that's essentially what you're designated as when you're the ammo printer. You're just fetching bullets.
No, we're ammo goblins.
Have fun. Like, maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but that
you're true.
That seems to be the impression that I have. Now, amongst all of this, I have also seen some people say that NotSwap also penalizes hunters even more than it penalizes the other classes. And I don't know if I agree with this.
I'm not a hunter main. It absolutely does.
Might be cope, but at the same time, it might be valid.
No, it's valid.
I'm not really sure. The impression I have is that there's quite a lot of hunter hate online, but then people who play as hunter actually are like, guys, like, you're all being dramatic. Like, there's plenty of fun end game options and like, I'm chilling. So I don't actually know whether or not I'm yapping here, but I have seen people say hunters would especially feel the negatives of NotSwap. So I figured I would mention it here just for complete.
Because in most situations, Celestial, Nighthawk, and even the pole dancer, start your scale, which you can actually just run the class item for. That is exactly, most people use Celestial Nighthawk because that's kind of like the name brand of doing the most DPS to support your team. Like, if you're not Warlock who's healing, or Titan that's bringing banners and just essentially helping support the team, or just smashing and killing waves of enemies with your concentration, you're the weakest link because you're not doing anything for the team. Like, I would say outside of Tether, hunters have the worst support options in the game. They're like, it's all like, hunters are selfish. Like, everything benefits them. They have almost no support for other parts of the team. Zero, zip.
So overall, I think that there are really reasonable arguments to be made both for NotSwap and against it. I think one thing that does need to happen is Bungie needs to look at NotSwap's functionality itself and say, hold on, is this working the way that we want it to? Should it work this way? And can we improve that in-game description? Because right now it sucks. And for a point this contentious, you need not add fuel to the fire by just having an ambiguous, poorly written description in the game. I think I'm excited, to be honest, about the prospect of facing the challenge, right? Like, it is going to be more tricky not to have loadout swaps available.
I don't think it's not necessarily tricky unless you forget that you swap a gun, like, and I lost all my ability energy. What's going to happen is people are going to still make their loadouts to swap. They're going to min-max the swapping. I'm going to use this specific build. And then at this moment where I don't need to rely on this build, I'm going to swap to my other build for DPS. I'm still going to swap to my surges, my mods to benefit me the most. I'm still going to swatch to the exotics that are going to give me the big boy damage and then all the extra pluses and whatnot. Everyone's still going to do all those things, but they're going to do it at a very timely fashion. They're not going to do it like, especially DPS, like most people don't care about abilities until after the DPS phase, in which case most cases with DPS, especially in these dungeons, you're going to have some downtime to kill trash ads like Demolitionist. That's a good one for grenades. You're going to be able to use swap to your mods, which then also help you build your armor charges, which then you can use to expend to get your other abilities. It is not hard if you are a skillful player to manipulate and plan and strategically time when you use these loadout swaps. I don't think it's going to actually change and make this a challenge. It's going to be more annoying, but it is not actually doing what Bungie wants it to do. It's not making it more difficult. It's making it more annoying. You're going to see some of these top teams still do loadout swaps. It's going to happen
as freely as they otherwise would be, and that limitation will be a fun thing to overcome, right? Just like I found it fun to duo contest Sundered, similarly, I will find it fun to...
I think there's a difference from doing something that's not intended, like two-manning a challenging 6-man activity versus a modifier that doesn't actually make it a challenge. It just makes it annoying. These are two different things, and I disagree with him in that regard. Most of everything he says is on point, but I think he's comparing two different situations. That one is actually a challenge because by design it's not intended, whereas the other is meant to be a challenge, but it's not actually a challenge, and it doesn't work the way it's supposed to.
Run ultimatum, right? I really do look forward to that, even if I think that NotSwap is an imperfect solution to the problem they're presenting. I actually think NotSwap doesn't even solve the problem that they're presenting.
No.
And I don't think the problem they're presenting is even in contest, but still, we're getting a mode with difficulty modifiers on it. I'm excited about that. Like,
again, these aren't difficulty modifiers. They're lazy Band-Aid modifiers. You want true challenge, you do things like Banes. I want to see a lot of Banes. I want a bunch of freaking meteors coming at my face during DPS. That's a challenge. How do you survive that?
I'm super excited to do that. So it's not making me less excited by any means. But what I will say, I would caution Bungie against, maybe from my limited experience here, is thinking that because we've now trialed this in Rights of the Nine, we should now make all contest mode raids day one also have NotSwap on. I think that would be a mistake, personally, because I think that people are pretty happy with contest tuning right now, and I think adding NotSwap there would feel like limiting build diversity. And I mean, as controversial as this might be to say, I actually think that if they really wanted to lean into that direction, I think I would prefer, and this is going to sound crazy, I think I would prefer for them to just lock loadouts. I know it's extreme, but if that really...
And there's a reason why people didn't like curated loadouts with year one raid layers. Everyone hated it. And it had more flexibility than locked loadouts. And people hated it. No one liked it. No one enjoyed it. It was just horrible. I think lockouts on Grandmasters is fine because it's content that you repeat constantly. So it needs to be a way that it forces you to make a build and deal with a build. Whereas contest is a limited event. You can't master the contest mode the first time. Like Grandmasters, once you know and it comes back around, you know where things are going to spawn. You know what you should do, how to min-max your build. You know what to go into. Like, there's a reason why we haven't had lock contest mode content is because on its own, it is a challenge. Solving the mechanics for the first time, that is the challenge. Overcoming the unknown is the challenge. Lockouts is not a challenge. Grandmaster has already been solved technically after the first time of doing it. People have solved it. So to make it more of the restriction of not being able to swap stuff, I think is fair because most people have it solved.
Is something that Bungie sees as the vision for Destiny going forward, for the high end specifically. I don't think it makes sense to diddle in the middle. You know what I mean? Like, we've got either no loadout limitations or we've got loadout locked, and we are fully diddling in the middle by doing this weird NotSwap. It affects helmets and boots, but not your class item. Like, it's just a bit weird. So
again, the reason why it wasn't working is because they haven't modified it since exotic class items came out, since the final shape.
If you're gonna really make our lives hell by not having swaps, fair enough. If that's the future of Destiny at the end of the day, it's still gonna be fun, right? It's just gonna mean that the build crafting is
I think that's debatable. I don't think it's going to be fun. It's just going to be annoying.
Totally different. And my suspicion is that they don't want the build.
What's fun is having a Bane come up to you and you don't know what it does because it's a new Bane. And you're like, what does this do? And then it blows up in your face because it's a hypernova freaking exploding dog. And you're like, what the hell? Like, that is cool.
Crafting to be totally different. It's just that it's difficult for them to design encounters while people may or may not have a 70% damage boost. That's my assumption right now. I don't even think that it's that people are complaining that much. I think that what DMG has said there is that they're often hearing that issue. But
I'm gonna finish up. Everything he says is mostly correct. This is a smoke screen. They're not getting complaints like this. What it is Bungie's using this as an excuse to implement a Band-Aid fix because they don't want to put the time and resources into this actual activity that is a limited time event to actually make it harder. Instead of actually working on mechanics and investing in it and really expanding on the challenge, this is a Band-Aid fix to give it the illusion of challenge. They're not actually doing anything outside of adding decreasing your attack and decreasing your resistance against other enemies. Like, contest mode is just you're essentially dropping the damage and how much you take. Like, that's just a modifier on its own. NotSwap is a smoke screen. This is just a smoke screen. It is just to give the illusion that it is harder. There's challenges because they're not actually, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe when we play it, they did tweak the mechanics, but based on this statement alone, that is very egregious and not true. It is simply because Bungie is too lazy. They don't want to spend the resources, and it's a free activity. Like, it's a free activity that's going to go away. Unlike Onslaught, which stuck around. These raids or dungeons, they already exist in the game, but it doesn't seem like any of the modifiers and things that they're doing is going to stick around. So these already exist. They're not actually probably going to change any of the mechanics outside of the Explorer mode, which I do think should stay. But Explorer mode isn't supposed to be challenging. So the changes they made is based on the new player experience, Whereas they probably didn't do any real changes on the challenge mode. Maybe they did. Again, we don't know. But based on the fact that this is they really wanted to sell NotSwap after the whole drama came out about it. They were so desperate for it to be the end all of high end solving the problem, because they don't want to actually take the time to make the mechanics, make the actual encounters harder, which is probably why we won't see it in future contest modes.
But that is more so him saying, we feel that this is a design problem and people out in the world also feel strongly about it. But what I would like to see Bungie maybe commenting on here and
show us the receipts
and adding to their NotSwap conversation or whatever, is that they realize that the ammo economy ultimately may actually be the bigger problem, especially in contest contexts. And if they're going to implement NotSwap here, if they could also do something to make sure the ammo economy is better, then a lot of my personal gripes with NotSwap go away very quickly.
Yeah, I think that I always say it. People would be okay with NotSwap if they weren't locked into a support build, because they could just play the game and get ammo. And I think people think like, oh, Bungie needs to instantly give you max ammo. That's not what people are saying. They just don't want to sit there and farm and kill things and get like no drops. There's nothing worse than you've killed like 20 enemies and there's nothing on the ground. Meanwhile, your teammates say, hey man, I got like 30 bricks. I got 30 bricks. I'm good to go. And you're doing no damage. You're not helping the team. You are a liability because you didn't win the slot machine in the Destiny game. Like, people don't want to play Gamba in Destiny. They just want to play the game.
I still think it's worse to diddle in the middle, but it's better for sure. It's decidedly better. So DMG and Bungie, consider this my feedback from a new player. I've really tried my best to lay out as much of the...
Again, Milo, new player, knows more about the game than a lot of the Destiny community and even Bungie themselves. I'm just going to say one last thing. MoSense. They already had cooldowns. You couldn't spam them. MoSense solved this problem, but for some reason, Bungie decided we can't bring that into Destiny 2. Destiny 1, MoSense was a solution. And I think they should come back. I think Bungie should bring MoSense, and we could have you can decide how long the cooldown is. But I feel like if you're playing the game and you're farming and you get no ammo, you shouldn't be punished. Then that's when you would pop an MoSense. You're like, okay, cool, I got. Now, could you abuse that and say, oh, well, I've got ammo here, I'm popping MoSense, so I'm double dipping? Yeah, it's not like you're going to be able to drop all the ammo in one slot unless you're using Ethereum, Anethereum, or whatever the hell it's called. In it's not like you can pick up all the ammo from the map and put it in one place unless you're using shoot to loot. Most time you have to take time from doing DPS to do that. Again, I feel like it wouldn't be a problem to bring back MoSense. I just don't. That's my thought. Link will be down below for you to check out the video. Like I said, he came from a very logical, non-emotional state where people often like to ignore facts and logic. And especially in the state of Destiny right now, a lot of people like to do that. I think he brings he hits all the main points that I see against NotSwap, and the points that are the problem with the whole debate about it is it doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do. And you're going to see people still swap gear in contest mode. It's going to happen. Just the more skillful players are going to know when to do it versus doing it constantly. I'm Mr. Gaming Counselor. Hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. As always,